Hello and welcome to tonight's broadcast of Tap into the Truth. Our first scheduled guest, Mr. Lloyd Chapman, founder and president of the American Small Business League. He's also the founder of a special project of his called Don't Cheat Women that aims to elevate women-owned small businesses in federal contracting. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Lloyd Chapman. Well, thank you for joining us this evening. I certainly am honored that you took some time out of your very busy schedule to come
Sure.
talk to us today.
It's a pleasure to be with you.
Um, all right. Well, thank you. Let's jump right into things, shall we? In Trump world, tariffs are designed to do one of two things. One is to right a perceived imbalance in his mind, or B, and seems to be the most common thing, is to gain some type of leverage over you. A lot of people, however, are rightfully so concerned about what the effects these tariffs can have, especially on small business. And since that's certainly your wheelhouse, let's jump right in on the most important question and kind of go from there. If the current tariffs that are in place remain in place and any of the threatened tariffs happen to be put in place, what are going to be the immediate and then possibly long-term effects for small business in the United States?
All right. Let me first throw out some numbers that most people know that 99.9% of all firms in America are small businesses. 98% of all U.S. firms have less than 100 employees, and 97% of all exporters in America are small businesses. So tariffs have a big impact on small businesses. I was actually in Canada when this hit, and I was watching on Canadian television, right? And it was a perspective I think that a lot of people in America didn't have. But I think President Trump did that to get some leverage on Canada. I don't think he intended to actually have it be a long-term, project. And I think they sort of came to some agreement, pretty quickly. But tariffs are not good for small businesses. It's going to increase their costs if they either have to reduce their profits or pass the price increase on to their customers, right? And it's going to disrupt, your supply lines. When I was in Canada, I was actually riding the ferry from Vancouver to Victoria, British Columbia, watching this on the TV in the ferry. And there was a big anti-American deal. I saw this hockey game. I think some American team was playing a Canadian team. And when they played the American national anthem, all the Canadians were booing like that, right? And they launched a program in Canada to buy Canadian. And I actually have a Canadian friend stay with me for a few days here. And I think it was really unfortunate, the bad sentiment that it created between Americans and Canadians, right? But again, overall, it's not good for small business. You ever use Perplexity, that AI package? I actually typed it into Perplexity, the impact of small business as increased costs and lower profits, price increase to consumers, supply chain disruptions, inflation pressures, trade wars, and retaliatory tariffs. So again, when I was in Canada watching television, Canadian Prime Minister immediately started putting in retaliatory tariffs. I think it's hard to win a tariff war. It's kind of like being a fight where he hits you and you hit them back and forth. No one's going to win, right? So I think it was temporary. I'm glad it's temporary. I don't think it's going to be long term. But for small businesses, I can't think of anything that's good about tariffs for small businesses. Actually, I remember this in elementary school. When I was in elementary school, I remember them talking about tariffs when I was, like sixth grade, whatever. And I think traditionally tariffs are used if some other country can produce a product that's cheaper or better quality, you put a tariff on it to protect your industry. It's a protective measure. Does that make sense?
Right.
But the problem in America is, I've had this discussion with a lot of people. If you go into Costco, everything in there is from China, just about. And I sometimes talk about, like, every electronic device in my room is made in China. Everything, right? And if somehow we put tariffs on that, think about, I think my cell phone cost, I don't know, like $1,500. Think about having to pay, $3,000 for the same phone, right? But anyway, so I hope Trump did it just as a negotiation tactic. He's a great negotiator, right? He's a very powerful negotiator. And I hope that was just a negotiation tactic and not some long-term thing.
Right. Yeah, I think the very idea that he left both the tariff threat with Canada and with Mexico open-ended, say, okay, we're going to postpone it for a month. I think that's designed to keep them motivated to uphold their end of the deal that they meant. So I have no doubt that that is the intention, that he'd much prefer. But then we turn around and we see like the tariffs on aluminum, for example. Alcoa, a major American aluminum producer, suddenly saw a lot of market capital head their way as a result of that. But at the end of the day, that's not really going to be indicative of what that impact is for our economy. Clearly, the hope is to create a more even playing field. But ultimately, we have a situation. The primary reason so many of those items in Costco are from China has to do with the fact that they're able to produce them much, much cheaper and
Yeah.
are at least comparable quality. Now, we're not going to delve into the political aspects of why they can do it so much cheaper in this conversation. That's a completely different topic for another day. But is that going to be beneficial long run, even though we're clearly going to see a short-term increase in a lot of everyday items that rely heavily on aluminum?
Aluminum's in everything, right? It's
Just
in,
about.
it's in everything, right? I would imagine that, Boeing is really keeping an eye on that, right? That's everything they make is made out of aluminum, right? And, but yeah, I think that's going to be something that we really need to keep an eye on. By the way, Alcoa Aluminum, I remember doing some research on them several years ago. That's an amazing company. I think that company has always been profitable for as long as they've been around, which I think is almost like 100 years. That's an amazing company. They've stayed profitable for decades and decades and decades, right? Think about the aluminum in canned drinks. All those, canned drinks and Coke and Pepsi and Sprite, that's all aluminum cans, right? So, yeah, we'll have to see how that shakes down. But again, I just hope it's something temporary. And yeah, what do
Right.
you think? Do you think it's going to be temporary or long term?
Well, I think this is one where he's probably thinking that it's more of a long-term tariff just because he wants to try to help elevate American standing in the industry again. Alcoa has maintained a certain level of profitability, just since that's the example I pulled out of the air. But when you look at it, though, once prices normalize, once there's stability in other places, we could see that level of competition kind of push for further innovation. The tariffs kind of help reduce the amount of motivation to continue to innovate and to bring your market cheaper. Uh, that, of course, is going to affect not only soft drinks, but also a lot of other beverages as well. I know a lot of beer companies have already been complaining that they're going to have to raise their prices. And it could also help reinvigorate glass industry for a lot of the containment in that area. Although
True.
I think plastic is still going to be the way to go. The glass provides a better flavor profile. It's still way more expensive. Um, I do think ultimately it's harmful because in your effort to try to level that playing field, what you really do is reveal that the marketplace is a very unforgiving place. And if you're not accustomed to paying American wages for American products, you're not going to be happy about suddenly having the Chinese options removed from you.
Exactly. When I think about this, can we agree it's all part of Trump's plan to make America great again? Is that it's within that framework? All
Yeah.
right, here's what puzzles me. So again, 99.9% of all US firms are small businesses. They're responsible for half the gross domestic product, half the private sector workforce, over 97% of all exporters, and most importantly, 98% of all net new jobs. The only federal agency to support those 34 million small businesses where most Americans work is the Small Business Administration. And the SB's main program is the Small Business Act. That's the largest economic stimulus program Congress ever passed for the middle class to create jobs and put federal contracting money into the middle class economy. So today, the federal law mandates 23% of all federal contracts go to small businesses. Well, the 99.9% are small. That just means 1/10 of 1% are large, right? So under current federal law, that's 23% going to the 99.9% of companies and 77% going to the 1/10 of 1%. That doesn't seem like a good idea to me. And here's something to make it even worse. A few months ago, the Government Accountability Office put out a report that said 34% of the largest, most profitable companies in America pay zero federal income tax. And the Kauffman Foundation put out a report 10 years ago that says Fortune 500 firms haven't created one net new job in over 40 years. So when I look at Trump's overall economic policies, I'm puzzled by why he's not doing more to help the 99.9% that are small businesses. If he wants to make America great again, you can only do that, or primarily do that, with small businesses, right? And again, 97% of exporters are small businesses. So I don't really understand. I read, I think he's laid off 1,000 people at the SBA. And so logically, does it seem logical to you, Tim, that we probably need to expand small business programs, not contract them? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, again, this is one of the few areas that I have a lot of strong disagreement with a lot of Trump's stated agendas. There are certain areas that it's very counterintuitive to expect to actually be helpful towards the direction we're going in. This being one of them. Small business, it's been stated so often it's almost become cliche, but small business really is the backbone of the American economy.
Exactly. That's true. That is so true. I'll tell you something. I've never met anybody that knew that 99.9% of all federal contracts, 99.9% of all businesses were small business. I never, when I ask people, they go, 20, 30, 40, but no one ever guesses it's 99.9. And, if you watch national television, you would think that it's much lower than that, because all the discussion on TV is about that 1/10 of 1%, right? The stock market, if you watch national news, are talking about that 1/10 of 1%. Yeah, our economy is based upon small businesses. Before Bobby Kennedy dropped out of the race, I was working on his campaign. I did his podcast, and we came up with some ideas that evolved into his economic stimulus program. It's called Small Business, Big Middle Class. And I wish Trump would take a look at that. I think that program would really make America great again, because what Bobby Kennedy proposed is making sure that small businesses get the full 23% that they're supposed to get. I've seen reports that show they're getting maybe 5%. And then here's something that your female viewers are like, women are half the population. They own 42% of the businesses. And for decades, companies owned by men have gotten over 95% of all federal contracts. And Bobby was going to increase that from 5 to, I think, 10 or 25, right? And that would be a huge economic boom. That would triple the number of new jobs created in America. So I really hope Trump takes a look at it. I was happy to see that Bobby got confirmed today, and now he's going to be on the cabinet. And maybe in some cabinet meeting, they can start talking about the economy, and Bobby can bring up his small business, big middle class economic stimulus program, and maybe get Trump to focus more on small businesses. Does that make sense to you, Tim?
Oh, well, absolutely.
Yeah.
And that also kind of the point you just made takes us into the discussion about your project. Don't cheat women. I don't think people truly appreciate the statistic you just pointed out. How many women own small business, and then how often they seem to be froze out of the opportunities, and sometimes for no reason other than the fact that apparently a decision maker probably has a subconscious bias and isn't really paying attention to what's being provided or the track record of the companies. What was the triggering point for you to decide that you needed to launch this project?
Well, I'll tell you the truth. I spend, I'm on X, formerly Twitter. I spend a lot of time on that. People can follow me on X. My website's ASBL and don'tcheatwomen.com. And I was on the internet, And a story popped up that said that most of the people that have been killed since 9/11 in the war on terror were women and children. And I was shocked at that. So I started doing some research, and turns out that was true. And unfortunately, I saw some pictures that I wish I hadn't seen, right? But I just started thinking about, to tell you the truth, I've been a small business advocate for 35 years. I've won a record number of lawsuits against the government to protect federal programs for small businesses over the last 35 years. And I've always known that the goal for women-owned small businesses is 5%. But one day, about a year ago, I'm driving down the road and it hit me. Well, that means that men get 95%. And I started thinking, well, that's kind of not fair. And I kind of think that if we had more women in government, I think things would run better, quite frankly. I think things would run better. I think that someone that was a mother and had children would be much more hesitant to get America involved in some conflicts on the other side of the world where, innocent civilians might get killed, right? But so it was twofold. It was a story about the civilians being killed, in the war on terror, and thinking that it's really not fair that men get 95%. What I thought about is, women are paying their taxes, right? You don't get an exemption for taxes because you're a woman. But again, I just think it would be more equitable. I think it'd be more equitable. It would be great for the economy. It would create about 2 million new jobs a year, and it would create an economic boom. So there's no downside for the government to give more federal contracting dollars to women. It's a win-win-win situation.
So, since you started the project, what governmental officials have you been able to talk to, and what level of success have you had to this point? Because I would imagine there has to be some ears that are willing to listen to the project and certainly understand the point you made. Because when it comes right down to it, a lot of us guys tend to rely very heavily on the women in our lives to manage a lot of things that we like to pretend we don't have time for, but would really rather just not bother with.
Yeah. You know what? The response has been very positive. In fact, I'd say it's slightly overwhelming. I've got more people I'm supposed to talk to than I've got time to talk to. And I'm actually going to hire a PR firm to help me manage that. I just did a call with them a couple of days ago. But mainly, I'm reaching out to women's groups. I've reached out to the National Association of Women Business Owners and Women Impacting Public Policy, the National Women's Law Center in Washington. So what I've been doing, lately is reaching out to women's groups, trying to get them to, come on board with it. And as you can imagine, I've never met a woman that knew that 95% of all federal contracts went to companies owned by men. And I've never met a woman that didn't support the Don't Shoot Women project. They love it, right? When you talk to women about it, they think the goal for women should be 50%, right? So I'll be really happy if we can get it to 10. But about 15 years ago, the Senate Small Business Committee did a study that said for every 1% contracts to small businesses go up, it creates 100,000 net new jobs a year. So if the goal for women-owned small businesses went from 5 to 25, that's 20% more. That's 2 million new jobs a year. America's only claimed to be creating about 2 to 2.5 million new jobs a year. So giving women just 25% of the contracts would virtually double the number of new jobs in America. Now, a lot of people don't know this, but the monthly jobs report in America is used by the stock market in America and by world markets to judge the strength of the U.S. economy. And the fluctuations that are like 5 or 10%. So you'll see it in the news all the time. They say the jobs report came out, and I think last month they said they created 150,000 new jobs. When the jobs report is positive, the stock market goes up. When it's negative, it goes down. Now, again, these fluctuations are 5 or 10%. Guess what would happen to the stock if it went up 100%? That would affect, again, the market in America and world markets, because world markets respond to that monthly jobs report, again, as an indication of strength of the U.S. economy. So, the benefits are just, incredible. And there's no downside, quite frankly. No new taxes, no new spending, deficit neutral. The government just needs to increase that goal and encourage, federal agencies and government contractors to achieve those goals. Maybe give them some incentives, to do so. But I'm surprised, to tell you the truth, that someone else hadn't thought of this. I'm a 75-year-old guy, semi-retired, And I'm surprised some women's group hadn't come up with this, 20 years ago. But I'm getting ready to launch a program to reach out to Congress and see if they'll, help out with it.
Right. Well, it certainly seems like the kind of thing that would be well received, I'll say. I think there's plenty of people that now better understand the power of women in business, way more so than a couple of decades ago, at the very least. When it comes to what the American Small Business League is doing actively now, what are your primary daily goals there? What are the things that you guys are doing hands-on?
All right. Well, for 35 years, my number one goal is to get the government to quit giving small business contracts to Fortune 500 firms. So your listeners can go search on Fortune 500 firms get federal small business contracts. There's a multitude of stories. In 2001, I got the Government Accountability Office to launch the first investigation into fraud in federal small business programs. And they found over 5,000 of the biggest companies in the world were listed at the SBA's database of small businesses that federal agencies were using. It was like 5,300 of the biggest companies on the planet. You can't name a Fortune 500 firm that wasn't in that list. And then some of the biggest companies around the world. I testified before Congress, and unfortunately, it's still going on. So that's been a continual battle. The other thing I do is I'm always fighting efforts to close the Small Business Administration. So, that law that says that 23% of all federal spending goes to small businesses. Well, that top 1/10 of 1%, they've got more power than the 99.9. I think we all know that. And they want all that money. So those big companies that have so much clout in Washington and fund all those campaigns and hire those lobbyists, they want all the money the government spends to go to them. So for 40 years, those companies and those industries have been pushing to close the SBA. And every president is pressured to close the SBA. Every single president. You can go back and look. Reagan tried to close the SBA. Bush Jr. tried to close the SBA. Obama tried to close the SBA. And when Trump was first elected in 2016, the SBA budget and staffing was the lowest in 40 years. And I was shocked to find out he cut it even further. And again, I think it was last week they laid off, I want to say 20% of the SBA staff. So I just don't understand. I don't understand the thinking. We want to make America great again. America's 99.9% small businesses. The people that voted President Trump in office are small business owners and employees. Again, the 34 million small businesses where most Americans work, those are the people that elected Donald Trump to be president. So I just wish he would, take a look at his policies and maybe try to come up with some more positive policies for small businesses to create jobs and really make America great again.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that ultimately, I think, for most conservatives, we tend to believe that the role of government when it comes to business is to create an environment that's conducive to their growth, to try to reel back regulations, not to the point of endangering the public, but to the point of allowing businesses to grow and innovate.
Yeah.
And if you're not being supportive of small business in that way, you're certainly not doing anybody any favors if you were sending money that has been earmarked for small business to the larger businesses, because let's face it, international conglomerates really don't need the extra help. And if you're going to have it there available and offer it, why would you send it anywhere else?
You know what? I just saw a thing on the internet a couple of days ago about all the American companies that are owned by foreign companies. It's quite shocking, right? It's surprising, And but again, think about this. And I'm not an economist, but I think we can figure this out, Tim. If we continue to give the majority of our spending to this tiny 1/10 of 1% that don't create jobs and 34% don't pay taxes, I think down the road that's going to cause a significant economic downturn. And we're 36 trillion in debt. The debt goes up $1 trillion every 100 days, and it just doesn't make any sense to me to keep giving the vast majority of our tax dollars to these companies that don't create jobs and don't pay taxes. And I think it makes sense to spend American tax dollars in the companies that paid most of those tax dollars, and that's small businesses, right? So again, I don't understand why Trump is doing that, other than the fact I think we both know that top 1/10 of 1%, that's who's got his ear. The 99.9%, the small business, I don't think they've got someone in the room with Trump, but those big guys, they've always got some people in the room with President Trump. So I'd like to try to, get other Trump supporters. I worked on his campaign for several months on social media trying to get him elected. When he was elected, I was thrilled, right? But I think we need to get more MAGA people, more Trump people to realize that small business is the heart and soul of our nation's economy, and we need some programs at the SBA to support those companies.
Yeah. I would think that if we've had anybody sitting in the Oval Office who understood that as well as Donald Trump should, based on his experience in real estate and having to work with contractors and small businesses and independent folks, that he would be as receptive, more so than any other person we've had there. But I guess time will tell. Lloyd, I want to thank you again for joining us. I appreciate you taking the time. I want to give you an opportunity to let all the viewers know where they can find you. Your work, feel free to share the websites. You're obviously inviting people to follow you on social media, so feel free to share your handles and platforms.
Sure.
And any final thoughts you want to throw out there as a closing discussion, feel free.
Everyone needs to support the 99.9% of small businesses that make America great, where most Americans work. And the only thing to help those small businesses, the SBA, we need a strong SBA with a budget and a staff that can help these small businesses. You can check me out at ASBL.com. All my national TV appearances are on LloydChapman.com. You can look at the Don'tCheatWomen.com website, and follow me on X. I put up a dozen posts every day, and I think I put up some things that people might find pretty interesting.
All right. Thank you so much again. And, I hope we can get together and continue the conversation. And hopefully,
sure, anytime, Jim. Anytime.
Hopefully we'll be discussing some good news.
Next time I'll turn the phone off in my office.
All right. Well, have a great rest of your evening.
Right, thanks a lot. See you later.
All right.